Week 8 fantasy football sleepers. Players for you to stream, players for you to stash. We're talking about fantasy football sleepers. We're giving you all those players that maybe weren't picked up on the waiver wire. Some of these players are going to go right in your lineup. You can use these players as streamers right away. Other players are going to be the ones you grab right now, you stash on your bench, and then next week, when the rest of your league runs to the waiver wire to scoop that guy, they say, oh, he's already rostered. Somebody picked him up on Saturday or Sunday morning. This is this show where every single week we're trying to find you that edge that you need to win in fantasy football. It's getting more and more difficult this year with all of the injuries, but we're all already seeing like a next man in mentality. You've seen multiple players provide big weeks for you this entire season. Week in, week out, you're seeing a new name pop up in the scoring column. That's what we're looking to identify here. We're also looking to identify players with increased usage. Coaching staffs change. We see teams go into bye weeks and come out and give players increased opportunities. Things change in the NFL. It is a long season, and we don't want to have take lock on anybody. So be willing to accept that younger players are going to get larger roles. Be willing to accept the guys that are struggling might see fewer touches as the season moves along. So we want to bring you an edge every single week. We're talking about sleepers, we're talking about stashes, and we're talking about streamers. And let's just get it started. Let's talk about the quarterback position. At quarterback, I mean, it's shocking to me that this player is still available, and it's Drake Maye. Drake Maye has been a top 10 quarterback for back-to-back weeks. He is a no-brainer addition for your fantasy football team. He's widely available. Drake Maye is still available in over 80% of leagues right now, and I'm a little surprised by that. This is a player who lacks the weapons, lacks the offensive line play, but he has a big arm, he has mobility, and we have positive game scripts every single week. The Patriots are going to be trailing every single week, and Drake Maye is going to be in multiple opportunities where they're in comeback mode, where he's going to pass the entire second half. This is exactly what we want for our fantasy football teams. Drake Maye, make sure you are adding him to your roster right now if he's still available in your league. Let's stick at the quarterback position. Let's talk about Russell Wilson. And I was talking about Justin Fields for multiple weeks on this show and also my waiver wire show. And if you like this show, make sure you're checking out my waiver wire show. That drops every single Monday evening, sometimes early Tuesday morning, right here on Player Profiler YouTube. But Russell Wilson took over for Justin Fields. Justin Fields goes 4-2 as a starter. Justin Fields is a QB1 in fantasy when they bench him. So we don't like it. But I'm willing to kind of say maybe I should have taken the L on this because the Steelers' offense looked the best it has all season long. They beat the hell out of the New York Jets. Just an absolute woodshed victory for them. And we saw Russell Wilson finish with 3 combined touchdowns. Found the end zone on a run. He also passed for 2 touchdowns, and one of them was a George Pickens. And the Russell Wilson-George Pickens connection is very strong right now and very promising. He has a proper alpha wide receiver there that's capable of scoring a number of touchdowns. So he's not going to be QB3 overall every week. That's crazy. But I think he's a locked-in starter in Superflex leagues. And if he has another strong performance today, then he becomes a consideration in single QB leagues as a streamer. They play the Giants this week, another winnable game for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and another game where Russell Wilson might look good. Bo Nix, locked-in starter for you on your Superflex teams. Bo Nix is still available in 79% of leagues. Bo Nix is 4th among all quarterbacks right now in rushing yardage. He has 2 QB1 finishes in his last 3 games played, and he ranks as the QB 18 overall. The Broncos are going to beat the hell out of the Carolina Panthers this weekend. So this is Bo Nix, a chance to have a real breakout game. One thing Bo Nix is not doing is passing for touchdowns. For us to take him more seriously as a quarterback in our fantasy lineups, we would want to see touchdown passes. But maybe this is the week that he starts to come on a little bit. And if he's going to rush for this many yards, then he has a little baked-in floor, especially for Superflex leagues. Bo Nix is an interesting one. And then let's talk about one more potential streamer. Let's talk about Marcus Mariota. And Marcus Mariota is the backup, obviously, to Jaden Daniels. And if you're watching this video or listening to this podcast you have to check. This is not the one for you if you're like that fantasy manager who just likes to set your lineups on Saturday night and then go about your business on Sunday and just check the scores on Monday. This is not for you because you're going to have to check what's going on Sunday morning with Jaden Daniels. There's a lot of mystery out of Washington as to what's going on with Jaden Daniels. It's like a rib injury. Jaden Daniels sounded like, hey, I really want to play, but it's not up to me. Then there was also like the beat reporters giving different information. It's a weird situation. If you're a conspiracy theory person, then maybe they had Jaden Daniels go out there yesterday to kind of throw the Bears off. So the Bears had to prepare for basically 2 defensive game plans. But if Jaden Daniels sits, I think Marcus Mariota is an interesting one in superflex formats. Now, the Bears are a very difficult defense to go up against. They've been extremely stingy to opposing quarterbacks, but Marcus Mariota had 2 touchdown passes last week. The Commanders are scoring a ton. There's a lot of like positivity with this offense. And you had the baked in rushing ability of Mariota. Mariota had 11 rush attempts last week against Carolina. So for me, it's sort of like, obviously we want Jaden Daniels out there, but if Jaden Daniels sits and you're in a super flex league and you're in a jam, I'm not scared to use Marcus Mariota. So Drake May is my favorite one out of all the ones I'm not giving a ranking like I do in the waiver wire because I don't know your team needs, but if you could add one of those quarterbacks, it's clearly Drake May. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. This is a really, really fun week for sleepers, streamers, and stashes, Fantasy Football Week 8.
Hey, I know it's a popular statistic to cite, these underdog pick'ems, the vast majority of people go more than on any given player. Yeah, close to 80% of people, but that's because it's easier to find the shootouts than it is to find the dud games every Sunday afternoon. Like we knew week 5, Ravens-Bengals was going to be a shootout. And there goes Lamar Jackson for 4 touchdowns. There goes Joe Burrow for 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry gets there. Zay Flowers is over 100 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both got there, as well as Chase Brown. Both Chases got there. You go more than. You 100x your payout on Underdog with their Pick 6 contest. But then you look at Dolphins Patriots, that's going down the toilet, right? Too bad Ramondre Stevenson at 18 fantasy points. But you improve your chances at positive returns when you correlate with these Underdog pick'ems. Use promo code Underworld. This is the biggest bonus Underdog has ever given out, up to $125. Promo code is Underworld. Put in $250, you get $125. Now go start picking.
Welcome back, Fantasy Football Week 8. Sleepers, streamers, and stashes. Players for you to stream, players for you to stash, sleepers. And how do I decide like which players I can talk about? I'm only discussing players that are available in 70% of leagues or more. So no player that I discussed today is going to be available in anything but 70% of leagues. So let's stick with it. We discussed our quarterbacks. This is a fun week for every other position. I actually have a number of running backs. I have a number of tight ends this week. It's sort of weird. I usually don't get that many tight ends. So let's go ahead and start it out. Let's stay here at the running back position. And for me, Ray Davis. Ray Davis is my number 1 ad of any of the players I'm going to talk about. He's still available to you in 73% of leagues, which is a little surprising to me. Ray Davis gave us the 150-plus yard performance in week 6 when James Cook sat out. Okay, so we got that. So we know he can produce at a high level. And he had 23 touches that game. So this isn't some guy who just like came in the game and gave us 10 touches and happened to break off a long play and had this like crazy scoring like line. Like he had 23 touches in that game in week 6. So you don't give a player 23 touches unless you trust him. And what did Ray Davis go out and do? Ray Davis went out and didn't fumble at all. So getting that massive volume, no fumbles, no turnovers for him, that's a huge thing for a young player. Then what happens? Week 7, James Cook comes back. And the James Cook usage went down. And a lot of people are going to say, Theo, Ray Davis did some stuff in garbage time. He got a touchdown in garbage time. The game was not like close at the time. But for me, there's some factors here that are indicating to me that this is going to be a little bit more of a split than James Cook managers want. And I'm not a James Cook hater. Anybody who's followed the information here at Player Profiler the last couple of years know that I have bags and bags of James Cook, especially on my dynasty rosters and a couple of redraft teams. So I sort of hope I'm a little wrong here, but I think the way this is going is Joe Brady, it has been very running back specific with what they're doing on the offense. Obviously, Amari Cooper is going to get a little more looks than the wide receivers who were there before. But for me, this is one where in every other game that James Cook and Ray Davis have played together, it's been a lot more James Cook with the production. We see this past week where James Cook doesn't get a target in the passing game. Ray Davis does. Ray Davis gets the touchdown late. James Cook doesn't get a touchdown. And James Cook is not a player who's like an 75, 80% snap guy. He's always been like a 60% snap guy. So I think Ray Davis is a guy where stash him on your bench. He's already proven to you he's one of the best handcuffs in football. James Cook's already missed a game with an injury this season. You never know if things are going to flare up again. So I know that Ray Davis gives me that value as a handcuff. And then also with bye weeks coming up, I know Ray Davis has enough talent and enough juice and a guy who can catch some passes here that if I have to use him in the flex, have to use him in the RB2 spot, my team is not dead for the week. I've got a little bit of juice, a little bit of life left. So Ray Davis, my favorite stash. And if you're in a complete bind, stream. Justice Hill, stash him. He's available still in 75% of leagues. Justice Hill has 21 catches this season. That's 10th most among all running backs. When the game flow dictates, the Ravens use him. They use him a lot. Obviously, Derrick Henry is that guy. Derrick Henry is the league winner, but Justice Hill has immense value because this is a top-notch offense. The Baltimore Ravens lead the NFL in yards per game by a lot. They're averaging well over 400 yards per game right now. This is an offense that's an absolute machine. And if Derrick Henry were to miss, and we don't even need Derrick Henry to miss half the season. If Derrick Henry misses 2 games, those 2 games for Justice Hill become very valuable to you. They could be 2 wins for you. So he's a really strong stash. I really don't prefer using him, but he's going to catch a couple passes. So if it like complete jam, maybe get like a 10-pointer, a 12-pointer out of him and maybe get through the week. Trey Benson, available in 83% of leagues. Trey Benson obviously is a stash, but a strong one. James Conner playing great. He's 29 years old and Father Time is undefeated. If James Conner goes down, Trey Benson would be the guy with Amari DiMercato working in as a pass catcher. But Benson would see the majority of the handoffs. Roschon Johnson, coming off of a bye week, available in 86% of leagues. This is a like-for-like replacement. DeAndre Swift playing great. DeAndre Swift is like catching all these passes. DeAndre Swift playing fantastic. But if DeAndre Swift were to miss time, Roschon Johnson is the guy because he can catch passes and they're thrown to the running backs. This is not rocket science. Add Roschon Johnson if you want a depth piece at running back. Now here's a sleeper / stash / I can stream him because I love the matchup. So the New Orleans Saints are getting absolutely fried by opposing running backs over the past 3 games. Kareem Hunt had 20 plus points. Okay, so Kareem Hunt was like not on a team, and then like 2.5 weeks later drops 20 points on the Saints. Then the Saints go up against the Bucs, and the Bucs absolutely steamroll them. They put 50 points up on them. And how did they do it? Bucky Irving, 1 touchdown, over 100 combined yards. Sean Tucker, 2 touchdowns, over 100 combined yards. So 2 Tampa Bay running backs, both were like RB1s. So you have Kareem Hunt, RB1, 2 Tampa Bay running backs, RB1s. And then what happens last week? Javonte Williams has one of his best games ever as a pro, and Denver completely smokes the New Orleans Saints. So we've seen 3 straight weeks with like 4 running backs giving you RB1 production. This is a defense in trouble versus the running back. So Kimani Vidal, for me this week, if I'm in a bind, I'm willing to throw Kimani Vidal out there as a streamer. Any way you cut it, Kimani Vidal is a great stash. Now, this could be a J.K. Dobbins game, and J.K. Dobbins could make this call look foolish. But with Kimani Vidal, I know he can catch passes. I know he's explosive. And I think there's going to be opportunities this game for him to get touches. They cannot give J.K. Dobbins this sort of volume and have him hold up for the entire season. Like, J.K. Dobbins is going to come to a point where they're going to be like, okay, J.K. Dobbins, let's hold him to like 17 touches this game, 16, 17. Doesn't have to be like 20 plus touches for J.K. Dobbins every week because Kimani Vidal is capable of handling 10 touches a game. The rookie running back has juice. We saw him score on a receiving touchdown 2 weeks ago. This is a player that I want to stash everywhere because the value the running back position has in LA. And this is a player that if I'm in a jam, I don't mind streaming this week. Kimani Vidal, grab him. Tyler Goodson available to you in 89% of leagues. Very simple one. Jonathan Taylor plays, then just keep Tyler Goodson on your bench as a stash. We know Taylor's dealing with injuries, so I'd have a sort of a banged up running back out there. I would hold his backup. Easy call. If Jonathan Taylor sits and misses another game, then Goodson becomes an interesting one. Now, it looks like Jonathan Taylor is going to play, but we never know how things go. You might get a report on Saturday night, might get a report on Sunday morning that he's actually not ready to go. So I would say it's like 90% sure Jonathan Taylor plays this week based on the reports coming out of Indianapolis, but I still want to roster his handcuff because we know he's already dealing with injuries. Here's a stash. Keaton Mitchell, available in 92% of leagues. Everything I said about Justice Hill applies to Mitchell. Mitchell was terrific last year. As a rookie, he had a 20-plus yard run in every single game he played. He is a small back with speed, but we saw him have multiple weeks where he gave us RB2 or better production, like 3 of them last year. He's been on the IR all season, and he's a great stash for you if you have an IR spot, especially. So if you have an IR spot, put Keaton Mitchell in there. Down the stretch, if they choose to sit Derrick Henry, like let's say they get to week 14, 15, and the Ravens look like they're winning handily most of these games. Like, depending on the way home field is shaping out, there's a chance that they could sit Derrick Henry, and you might get some Keaton Mitchell down the stretch towards the fantasy playoffs. Keaton Mitchell's an interesting one. I like to stash him. Green Bay Packers, Emmanuel Wilson, available in 93% of leagues. Marshawn Lloyd, available in 95% of leagues. Now, if you want to hold somebody who, let's say Josh Jacobs went down to an injury this week, next man in would be Emmanuel Wilson. But if Josh Jacobs went down for the season this week, then I think Marshawn Lloyd would end up taking over that job. And Marshawn Lloyd's also a guy with talent. You know, anybody who follows my Dynasty content knows I was very big on him as a prospect. He's available in 95% of leagues. And like Keaton Mitchell, he's still IR eligible. So add him. Jalen Wright is available to you in 93% of leagues. Tua Tagovailoa comes back. This is like the fall of the Berlin Wall for fantasy football. That's the equivalent of Tua coming back. It's hope, it's joy, it's optimism. Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, Jalen Waddle, if he's healthy. All 3 of those guys are like ready to rock. They're back in our lineups. So that means we also need to upgrade Raheem Mostert, and we also need to upgrade Jalen Wright. Jalen Wright would obviously have contingent upside if Raheem Mostert or Devon Achane were to miss time. And we know Jalen Wright can play a little bit because he's had 30-plus rushing yards for 3 straight games, and he's had an 86-yard performance in Week 6. Jalen Wright would be a guy you'd really want if one of the Miami backs went down. Dearness Johnson. Now, here is a potential streamer for you, especially desperate people. And you don't want me talking about Dearness Johnson, but this is where we're at. You might be in running back trouble this week. You might be in flex trouble. And the matchup indicates to me this could be a Dearness Johnson game. Now, if Travis Etienne plays, forget I said it. But if Travis Etienne sits or he's unable to play, then Dearness Johnson becomes an interesting streaming option. Now, last week, Tank Bigsby, we talked about him a couple times on this show and a couple times in our waiver wire as a priority ad. That one looked pretty good. Tank Bigsby's given you 100-plus rushing yards in 2 of the last 3 weeks. I got plenty of receipts on this one. We told you Tank Bigsby was a guy to stash on the show multiple times. Hope you listen. But this is not necessarily a Tank Bigsby game because they're going up against the Green Bay Packers, and this is a game where there could be a lot of pressure put on Jacksonville to keep up. Jordan Love might pass for 5 touchdowns this weekend. Love is leading the NFL in touchdown passes per game with 3 a game. And this is a soft Jacksonville secondary who plays a lot of man-to-man. So this is going to be like a potential game where it's a comeback mode, Jacksonville having to pass a lot. Tank Bigsby has 1 catch all season long. It was a 28-yarder. I think he's capable of doing that. But Dearness Johnson, we know, is capable of doing that. Dearness Johnson had 3 catches last week and 70 combined yards. I think you would get 3-plus catches this week against Green Bay if the game flow dictates. So he's an interesting streamer to me. And also a stash if this ETN injury lingers. Kendre Miller, available in 95% of leagues. Kendre Miller returned from the IR, and he showed promise. Finished with 36 rushing yards on 6 carries, and he caught 2 passes. Alvin Kamara obviously signs the extension. They pay Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara should retire a Saint, and Kamara has played very well. But this Saints team is sort of in a massive decline, and they could really use Miller as like a 10-touch-a-game running back to support Kamara, to support the offense in general. No Rashid Shaheed for the rest of the season. That's a massive loss, and this offense is sort of in a tailspin. So look for Kendre Miller to get worked in a little more, and obviously if Kamara missed time, he'd be a huge addition. Wide receiver spot. So I'll say like wide receiver for this show, I've had weeks where I've been a little bit more excited in terms of the depth. There's still some really, really fun options this week. We'll start out with Ricky Pearsall. And it sounds like Jauan Jennings might not play this week. I'm recording this on Saturday morning. And as of Saturday morning, Jauan Jennings may not play this week. We already know Brandon Ayuk is lost for the season. So Ricky Pearsall becomes a very interesting streamer. And at the very least, if he's available in your league, stop what you're doing, pause the podcast, pause the YouTube video, and go grab him and add him to your roster if he's available. He's available in like 70% of leagues right now. So this is a player that by the time you listen to this, he might be 50% rostered because of the Jennings news. So Pearsall is going to go right into our lineups this week as a wide receiver 3 or as a flex. First round pick, 4.4 140 speed, 40+ inch vertical leap. And he had last week 5 targets. And he had played 75% of the snaps last week. So first round pick, opportunity to play a ton, potential for 2 wide receivers being out. Ricky Pearsall, just add him. Use him if you need him. Jalen Tolbert, available in 79% of leagues. Tolbert was dropped in a bunch of leagues because a lot of leagues are shallow and you can't afford to hold people through buys. And also Dallas, there was like a big sour taste in everybody's mouths after that Detroit beatdown. He was getting cut. It was kind of a punitive one. And he wasn't awful in that game, but the Dallas Cowboys offense was really terrible in that game. But Tolbert, we know he can play. He's had 3 double-digit PPR point weeks this year, including that Pittsburgh one where he had like a 20-pointer. Dallas got that big win over the Steelers. So for me, Jalen Tolbert is one to add. I think he's going to end up giving you like high-end wide receiver 4 production for the rest of the season. And there will be weeks, if you add him now, there's going to be weeks that you're happy you have him on your roster because when the bye weeks start hitting, Jalen Tolbert get his buys already out of the way, and he'll be a guy you could stick in your flex, stick in your wide receiver 3 spot. Xavier Legette. Xavier Legette's one that I got a little bit of trouble on because I talked about him as a waiver wire addition. I've talked about him as a sleeper, and he's failed to deliver. He had that one big game, and then after that, it's been sort of downhill. But I'm back here telling you that maybe we want to stash him. I hope you don't have to use him in your lineup this week against Denver. Denver is a great defense. They have an absolute unit in terms of their defensive production this year. And this is a game where Bryce Young behind center, we know he struggles. So Xavier Legette, this is sort of a stash, but we have Deontay Johnson now missing this week. Adam Thielen is still not ready to go. There's also a chance that one of those guys could get traded. So Xavier Legette's like a stash for the second half of the year. Big-time athlete, first-round pick, a little bit touchdown dependent now. But if one of those guys gets traded, you'll see the increased targets on a weekly basis for the first-round pick. Cendric Tillman, one of the best names I'm talking about on this show is Cendric Tillman. Cendric Tillman is an exciting one because I think people don't want to believe it. I'm using Cendric Tillman in several of my lineups this week. So if he ends up getting a 0 points, come back and roast me next week and let me know what a bad decision that was. But Cendric Tillman ends up seeing a very similar usage as Amari Cooper in last week's loss to Cincinnati. So he had 12 targets. He caught 8 passes. That's a big-time performance for him. He was also the first read on a lot of plays. So it really was a lot of Tillman and a ton of David Njoku. Tillman, to me, is interesting because he's a wide receiver with size. He was a very good player at Tennessee. He was a 3rd-round pick in the 2023 NFL draft. So it's not like I'm telling you to go pick up some guy with some UDFA or some guy on his third team who just has an opportunity. Cendric Tillman has pedigree. Add Cendric Tillman. Sterling Shepard. And to get back to Tillman, if you're in a bind this week, throw him in your flex, throw him in your streaming spot. I know I am. I think lightning could strike twice, especially with Jameis Winston behind center. Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard is available to you in 88% of leagues. This one I don't like, but I'm willing to accept that one outcome that could happen is Shepard sees an increased role. Jalen McMillan was my number one ad on my waiver wire show. I highly recommend go checking that out. I talked about him a lot. That's still here on right in your if you're listening on the pod, you can listen to it. It dropped Tuesday. And if you want to check out the video, it's on Player Profiler YouTube. But in the waiver wire show, I talked a lot about Jalen McMillan. I feel like he's the one who's going to lead the charge, but Sterling Shepard could get it. I prefer Trey Palmer. I prefer Jalen McMillan, but Sterling Shepard, he's guy's 30 years old, played college football with Baker Mayfield. The guy's caught a lot of passes in his career. We'll see. Mike Williams. This is a stash only, but Allen Lazard banged up. So Mike Williams is going to see more opportunity this week as the wide receiver 3. But I think the value in rostering Williams is if Williams is traded to another team. Maybe he gets traded back to the Chargers and steps in as like the wide receiver 2 opposite Ladd McConkey and sees targets there. Maybe he gets traded to a mystery team and gets an opportunity. Mike Williams, if he gets traded, has value to you. Doesn't have value to you otherwise. So you could pick him up this week, stick him on your bench, and if he doesn't sign with another team, you could cut him loose in like 12 days. Troy Franklin makes for a very fun stash. Don't put him in your lineup this week. Stash him though. Available in 96% of leagues. This was a fourth round pick out of Oregon, and he played alongside Bo Nix in college. Troy Franklin was a player that, like, when the draft process started, some people thought would be like a first round pick, and there was a lot of us in Dynasty who were really excited about him. Obviously, he took a huge hit in the NFL draft and at the combine, dropped down to the 4th round. So he's a day 3 pick. But there's been some very positive signs recently. Caught a touchdown a couple weeks ago. And then this past week over New Orleans, he gets 6 targets and he catches 5 of them. So that's sort of like in the wheelhouse where we're like, okay, the targets are increasing. He's got the locker room narrative with Bo Nix, and he was a big-time producer in college. This offense needs playmakers. So maybe Troy Franklin could become a 7-8 target a game guy over the second half of the season, and he costs you nothing. Pick him up. If the usage stays consistent with what we saw last week, then you maybe have an interesting stash. Trey Palmer, available in 97% of leagues. This is a fun week because I've got multiple guys who are like sub 5% that if you're in a massive bind, you can create a picture in your head that you use these guys and they actually don't like destroy your week. Trey Palmer, he's the contrarian ad this week for the Jalen McMillan like hysteria. And I'm on Jalen McMillan. Don't get it twisted. I love Jalen McMillan, but I'm willing to be wrong. Trey Palmer is a second-year player, so he's got more NFL experience. He's caught 3 touchdown passes as a rookie last year, and now he steps into the vacated Mike Evans role. So the way it should work out should be McMillan in like a Godwin role and Palmer in like an Evans role. That's not necessarily what it was last week, but I think with a week for them to like regroup and like reshuffle, that's sort of how I would imagine it'll look, but maybe it doesn't. But anyway you cut it, Palmer's going to be on the field a lot, and he's got speed and big playability. Palmer played at Nebraska, but before that, he was at LSU. He was in an LSU wide receiver room with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, probably why he went to Nebraska. But it's kind of a cool fact. If I say Trey Palmer, LSU wide receiver, you're like, okay, let me go at him. If I say Trey Palmer, Nebraska wide receiver, you're like, Theo, I don't need to hear about it. So remember the LSU thing. And big respect to the Huskers. I know you guys are coming back. Tim Patrick and Kalif Raymond, these 2 players are potential streamers for you this week. And one of them could see enough usage this week that maybe you want to stream him again next week, because we have Jameson Williams serving a suspension, 2-game suspension for Jameson. And the Detroit Lions have more big plays, explosive big plays than any other team in football. This is runs over 10 yards and catches over 20 yards. They do that like 12.5% of their plays go for one of these explosive plays. So like there's going to be opportunities for one of these wide receivers to have a big play this week. We also know that Jameson Williams, that's sort of his thing, is big plays, catches over 20 yards. Kalif Raymond had a 20-yard touchdown catch last week. And then the previous week against Dallas, Tim Patrick hauled in 3 catches for 68 yards. So both of these guys have flashed over back-to-back weeks. And Raymond's got like over 100 combined yards over the past 2 games. So, and 7 catches. So like if you're in a bind, Kalif Raymond, Tim Patrick, you're not chasing a 0 here and throwing in the towel. There's both a scenario where these guys could play this week. So it's not a great thing. I'd prefer just kind of stashing and see like if we have a little more clarity for next week. But you might be in a complete bind this week. They might be a desperation streamer that you can talk yourself into. And again, it's a desperation streamer on one of the best teams in football. Jacob Cowing, if Jawan Jennings looks like he's not going to play, I talked about Ricky Pearsall as our top-notch streaming option, but it could actually be Cowing. Pearsall was the first-round pick. Jacob Cowing was the fourth-round pick. Jacob Cowing was a big-time producer at Arizona, though. Was a UTEP player, transfers to Arizona, catches a ton of passes, obviously played in the same offense with like Tet McMillan. But Jacob Cowing, he had 50 receiving yards last week. So was that a just 49ers scrambling, or are they going to use Cowing? Cowing has speed. This is an interesting player. This is, again, I really like stashing Cowing. I think that this is a cheap way of getting access to the San Francisco 49ers offense. And if it doesn't work, I cost you like $0 or $1 in FAAB. You don't need to go break the bank for Jacob Cowing. Let's just stash him and see if he does get usage. Tight ends, Noah Fant, available in 70% of leagues. He could see an uptick in usage with DK Metcalf set to miss this week. Over the last 6 games, Fant has 60 receiving yards in 3 of them. 0 touchdowns this year, but maybe that streak ends with Metcalf out of the lineup. Like maybe they use Fant a little bit more, big body. We know Fant can play a little bit. It's been sort of like a purgatory player this year, but if that ticks up slightly, 60 receiving yards for a tight end is very solid. So we don't want to like close the door on Fant. If you're in a bind, consider streaming him. Zach Ertz, another streamer. He had 8 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown over his past 2 games. Ertz is like your classic floor play tight end. Every year we get a tight end that emerges. Like last year it was Tyler Conklin, where it's a tight end where I feel like I'm always talking about them on the waiver wire, and I'm always talking about them on the streamer show because they're always going to be available in enough leagues, but they're also going to score enough points where if I need a streamer, I throw him in there. Ertz can go get you 10 points this week. Don't ask for much more, but he can go get you like 10 points in that. And if that's all you need to win the tight end spot, use them. Here's an interesting stash / streaming option. For leagues where Taysom Hill is tight end eligible, this could be a Taysom Hill game. The Saints play a pretty tough Chargers defense, and the last time we saw Taysom Hill play, he scored 2 touchdowns. So for me, this is like Taysom Hill. Maybe the Saints say, we're a mess right now. We're losing all these games. Let's give Taysom Hill double-digit carries this week and see what happens. And that's sort of the way I would go with things. I would put Taysom Hill behind center a lot, and you basically would get a lot of quarterback runs coming from your tight end. That alone has fantasy value. Maybe that becomes a thing that they have to do for a few weeks here with the way this offense is sort of trending downwards. Will Dissly, available in 99% of leagues. He's had 16 targets over his past 2 games. If you're in tight end, if you have tight end issues, consider grabbing him and seeing if this sort of becomes a thing. Now, he's not going to get 11 targets like he did in the Chargers' loss to Arizona. But what's interesting to me is we've seen Dissly do this coming out of a bye week, which means maybe they view Will Dissly as a guy they need to get more involved in their passing game. The Chargers have no pass catching weapons. Like they really, really put themselves in a bind here. But Justin Herbert is a good enough quarterback that he passed for 300 yards last week with like all these guys. So if Dissly's going to get you like 6-7 targets, let's say 6 targets a game, we're cooking there at the tight end spot. Even though he's a limited player, that's still a floor play. Jatavon Sanders, available in 99% of leagues. Sanders has played well. Rookie tight end out of Texas. Obviously played with like Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell last year at Texas. 13 targets, 11 receptions over the past 2 weeks. Jatavon Sanders is 21 years old. They're using him significantly. And everything I talked about with Xavier Legette, Sanders has outproduced Xavier Legette for back-to-back weeks. Sanders, their 4th-round pick. Legette, their 1st-round pick. Deontay Johnson out. Sanders could see additional targets this week. Jonnu Smith, available in 94% of leagues. Jonnu Smith's been playing really, really well. And sort of like he's done. This is Tyreek. This is Devon Achane. This is Raheem Mostert. This is Jalen Waddle. See ya, Jonnu. The only reason Jonnu got any targets is because we were limited at quarterback. But what if Jonnu Smith doesn't disappear and the last 2 weeks are indicative of him having a strong second half of the season? Probably not the outcome, but he's available in 94% of leagues, and he's a tight end who's been producing for 2 straight weeks. So I'm interested in stashing Jonnu for a week and just seeing what they do with him with Tua Tagovailoa. Does he disappear, or is this sort of like, hey, Mike McDaniel actually wants to use the tight end this year? I hope you enjoyed this show. Make sure you're subscribing to it on its own pod feed and also at the Player Profiler pod feed. It's going to be available to you on Player Profiler YouTube as well. If you're watching it on our YouTube channel, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. It helps us out a lot. It costs you nothing and helps us out a lot. And you'll get videos like this all week long. I'm dropping shows all week right here on Player Profiler channel, my waiver wire show, a bunch of my podcasts, and I do some special YouTube videos. Like pretty much every week I'm dropping one, multiple days a week. So if you enjoy this one, there's going to be way more for you. I'm Theo Gremminger. We want to provide you the edge you need to win in fantasy football here at Player Profiler. We want to help you crush your leagues this season, and we want to do it by giving you the best possible sleepers you can find. We'll see you next week.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.